Where should you sit on an airplane?
Welcome to Vacation Mavens, the podcast that brings you travel inspiration and practical tips from two moms who know how to plan the perfect trip.
I'm Tamara from Your Time to Fly.
And I'm Kim from Stuffed Suitcase. With over 40 years of travel experience between us, we're here to share our favorite destinations from road trips to cruising, theme parks, and European adventures.
Whether you're planning a family vacation or a mom getaway, we have the tips and tricks to make memories that will last a lifetime. So Kim, yesterday I was on the phone with Avianca Airlines because they canceled one of my flights and I had to rebook. And I was so used to looking at a seating chart when I'm booking online. That's on the phone. She was like, we have this and we have that. And I was freaking out because I'm like, I need to see it. And then she's like, I can give you row one. I'm like, no, I don't want row one. So it made me think maybe we should talk about our personal preferences, like some of the pros and cons to different areas of the airplane and different seats. Because I know it's a little bit overwhelming to try to figure out like where do you want to sit on the airplane, especially is it worth paying extra to sit in some of those places. So I thought we could talk a bit about that today.
I think it's a good topic. It's funny that you mentioned that because I was just in Cappadocia and our friends, Lindsay and Eric, I think specifically Lindsay, somebody was asking like, oh, I can't decide if I should buy these seats. They were not as accustomed to seat selection maybe. And Lindsay's like, you need to ask Kim. Kim always knows. Yeah, I think it's a good topic that it's not intuitive for everyone. So yeah, do you have a favorite? You said you didn't want row one. Why don't we lead there? Why did you not want row one?
Yeah, I know everyone, especially if you are in economy or in economy plus premium economy, you know, a lot of people want the bulkhead or even if it's not row one on a larger plane, you're going to have like that wall section and they're going to start a new section. So there's a seat that kind of has the bulkhead and you get a little bit of extra leg room. But I don't like it because you're not allowed to keep anything at your seat. So like your purse or your personal item can't be at your feet during takeoff and landing. And especially if I am in a window where then it's a little bit harder for me to get out and get my bag. I just want to have access to my stuff. I want it to be there because otherwise I'm thinking like, what can I bring in like a small little pouch or put in my pouch so that if I need like, I don't know, lip balm or a tissue, you know, like I have that there.
You have to have that like a travel scarf or something that has like the zipper pocket, right?
Yes. I also find that in the bulkhead or in the row one, and even this happens with usually the first couple of rows of the economy class of the airplane, is often where they either store some of the cruise luggage, or store like the blankets or some life jackets or medical things. There's always stuff there. It can be really hard to then, if you're doing carry-on only, to put your bag up top. So I find like when I'm in the row one, yes, I have leg room and that's great, but my bag may end up being like 3 rows behind me. Yeah. And then I have to try to find room because everybody has their carry-on bag plus their personal items. So it just gets crowded really fast.
It's doubled up. Yeah.
And then I'm like fighting with people to get past them to get it as soon as we land so that I don't have to. Oh, it's just like, wait. Yeah, I hate all that. So I would rather be a few rows back and have hopefully space for my bag and be able to keep something at my feet. So that's my thinking.
I'll give 3 reasons I avoid bulkhead. And then also one reason that a lot of people do bulkhead that we haven't really mentioned. But the reasons I avoid bulkhead seats are, like you said, that thing. But also a lot of times they have fixed armrests, which isn't always a thing. And the TVs are like, so especially in like international carriers, the TVs are like here. So you constantly are looking like down if you're watching any of the on-screen entertainment, if you have your own system. But yeah, so I just find I hate having, and I'm a slender person. In some ways I like from the germ and people not touching me, I like the fixed armrest. But just from a comfort standpoint, it's like kind of a pain sometimes just to be like walled in against your hips.
Yeah, no, I agree because they're not just fixed. They're like a full.
It's a wall.
Yeah, it is a full thing because that's where your tray table, your entertainment is stored, where you flip it up and pull it up. Yeah. And so I agree. And often sometimes they have that thicker seat belt.
Yes, exactly. You know? The airbag. There's an airbag or something there or some weird thing. It's so bulky and uncomfortable. So that's one of the reasons like I just find the chairs are sometimes not as comfortable. I also know that many times, especially in the economy cabin, those bulkhead seats, especially the middle section, there's the bassinet that fits there. Mm-hmm. And so if you're sensitive to sound, if you don't have good noise canceling headphones, whatever the case may be, just know that you have a good chance of there being a baby and a family there. So that's another reason that I sometimes avoid those seats. I have also a lot of times on international flights, those bulkhead seats will also on the aisles will have the exit door. So there'll be exit and bulkhead, like exit seats. I guess the bulkhead's the middle section. But the slides can sometimes be built into the door. So if you're on the window side of those, it's extremely cold.
Yes.
And you don't actually get full leg room because there's some
It
weird
kind of bumps out a little
slide
bit,
bumps
right?
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are all reasons I
Yeah.
avoid it.
Yeah.
I think one of the big perks of it is, especially if you're going to get work done or something and you don't have anyone in front of you that can lean and take up your tray space. So if you have issues with claustrophobia, if you have issues, really want to work and you don't want to deal with the tight squeeze of your screen, those would be reasons you might want to pick that seat.
Yeah. It makes me think of when you and I flew to Portugal. Exactly. And the woman in front of me reclined instantly. And yes, exactly what Kim just did. If you guys are watching on video, literally just from the tip of my nose, I used my hand, and that was then her.
It was like the hang 10. She was like hang 10ing, and you could use the hang 10. If you touch it to your nose, you could touch the back of her seat. Yeah. Which is generous, granted, for the other person. Generous recline on tap. Aer Lingus is a similar-ish type thing on Aer Lingus. Like some of those, generous recline, but not
positive
so good.
Side.
Yeah, I'm trying here. Anyways,
so
that's also a reason why I'll try to zigzag myself if I'm choosing a seat. So I don't sit with someone behind you. And so go ahead.
I will, yes. And just to jump to that tip, I will choose my seat when I book. I'm willing to pay for it or use my status I like to know where I'm going to sit. But I will look at the seat map like in the days leading up to the flight and when I'm checking in. It can always still change as they upgrade people or whatever. But if I see, like suddenly there's somebody next to me, but then there's this other row that there's no one in the middle, like I might switch just to have a little bit more personal space. So I will and see who's around me and then possibly switch it up.
A tip on that, especially on long overseas flights that I just did, I almost don't want to share this because it's going to hack my system. On my Aer Lingus flight, I saw when I checked in that there was someone next to me. And so their airplanes were 2-4-2, right? So the seating configuration. Yep. And I saw somebody was sitting next to me already in the 2 seat, but across from us, it looked like that whole row of 4 was still empty. And so when I got to the airport, not when I was checking in, but because I carried on, but when I got to the gate, I went a little bit before boarding, 5 minutes before boarding. And I just went up to the gate agent and I said, hey, I'm just curious. I noticed there's somebody right next to me because I didn't care about being at a window or having a view. And I said, are there any of the 4 seats across from me where I would not have anybody next to me? And she was like, oh yeah. So right across from you, those are all open. And so when I got on the plane, I just sat there assuming that it would stay empty. Because people, once they take off, people will start trying to figure it around. But if I knew in advance, so I was able to just take it before I had to fight someone else for it.
Yeah.
And sure enough, so some guy put his kid at the other end and that kid laid down. So I only got 2 of the seats, but still it was fine. But I was excited, I could stretch out across all 3, but I was too late on that. But it's no big deal. And so I had 2, and just having that extra space, my bag went there. So I was able to stretch out in mine. I could lean over a little this way.
Just to not have to sit with your shoulders curled forward to not touch anybody is enough
for
me.
Exactly. And then the people in front of us naturally we all zigzagged ourselves so everybody could lean all the way back to sleep and we weren't in each other's way. So that was a nice little perk. So it was like I was surrounded by conscientious travelers that were aware.
Shocking.
Which is so rare.
And a plane that wasn't full, which is also shocking.
Yeah, the way home, that was not happening. The way back from Dublin was packed full. So
let's work our way back in the plane. What are some other tips that you would recommend people think about when they're choosing a seat? What do you go for?
I think the obvious one that everyone yells about is the bathrooms.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah. Do not. Yeah. And there's an interesting thing about bulkheads and bathrooms with that too that we'll mention in a minute. But yeah, just be aware of where the bathrooms are. I flew Iceland Air and it was a press trip and they upgraded me to seats closer in the front. But they upgraded me to, I'm not even joking, this row 16. It had fixed armrests. It was horrible. Nobody was next to me, but I couldn't take advantage of it because not just fixed armrests, it had the wall armrests. So I couldn't stretch out. And then opening right across from my row was one of those bathrooms, which is on certain I think like A330s or something, the bathroom actually opens across from a row of
From a
seats on
row,
the
yeah.
right side of the plane. Horrible. Just the noise, the smell, like you can block out the noise,
The
but
light.
the smell, the light every time, like all of it.
Yeah. And people congregating. Like I remember one time Glenn and I were flying to Italy, but we were connecting through Copenhagen. It was like trying to find the cheapest flight or whatever. And we were right across from a bathroom, and it's all night. People just in and out, and like the light, like you said, the noise, the smell. And definitely
Hmm.
like some of those like pseudo bulkheads where there's bathrooms and there's your next section, and sometimes there might
Yeah.
even be a curtain, but because there's that extra space, people are going to use that space to congregate and wait in line. And so like they're like hanging out and hovering over you, and
Yeah.
I
And they
cannot
always
sleep.
step into your
Yeah,
space.
they've
If
into
there's
your
a thing, they
space.
step into your space to get, and you're just like, oh my
Sometimes
goodness.
they hang out there. I may see people hanging out there. They're like on their
Doing their
phones. They're doing their
yoga.
yes,
Yeah.
doing their stretches, and you're just like,
Yep.
buddy, like you're right in front of me. And like
Yep.
I get it. I don't own that space, but it's really disruptive. So
Agree
definitely
with all of
bathrooms
that.
like one of the most important things to think
And I
about.
think related to bathrooms is galley as well. I know there was on one of my, even in business class once, I was at the front, but I know what business class is. And I know that there's dishes and you can just hear it. And normally it's not a problem because you have AirPods. But again, the people walking past you go up to the bathroom and then just asking for stuff, or the galley attendants coming to and from the cabin and all that. I don't like that, again, because the curtain moves, it just draws your attention, right?
Yeah.
So that's another thing I avoid, is just all of it is around those bathrooms, galley. I'd rather be 5 rows back and just zoned.
5 rows back, 5 or 6 is actually my sweet spot because,
Yeah.
like I said, I find it harder to get, even if you have status and you're getting on board, unless you're like one of those people that's fighting your way to the very front of the line and being super obnoxious. There's other people with status, other people that paid for those premium seats or whatever, or they're in your group that are putting their bags up before you. So I like to be a few rows back because it gives me like a little bit more flexibility. But
Yep.
then I also, the ones that are like right in front of the, what's it called? Exit row.
Right.
Sometimes those are also used for storage of things
Yeah.
by flight attendants. And I find sometimes putting your bag up. Again, some of this doesn't matter as much if I'm checking a bag, but when I have to store, I think
Yeah.
more about that. Generally, exit row is good, but I just am always aware that it might be a little bit tighter to store my bag there, especially if we're
Yeah.
traveling the three of us and all three of us are carry-on only in one row. Then I know, oh, we really need to we need to get a
Be
whole
smart. Get on there.
bit of
Yeah.
space,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah. I would say also, when you mentioned exit row, a lot of times, especially on international flights, but it's like the row before the bulkhead or before the bathrooms or before the exit row, often don't recline or have very limited recline. So beware of that. I see a lot of people where they don't even realize that they're like, how there's maybe 2 sections of the plane and they're in the back row of the first section. So they're not at the back of the plane, but they're at the back row of the back section, but there's a wall right behind them. So
Right.
their chair only goes back 1 inch before they hit the wall. And then it's like your
Yeah.
head's hitting the wall. So if you're a tall person, that's definitely a problem with that area too.
We mentioned aisle versus window. We know nobody really wants the center seat, but what is your preference, and does it differ depending on what the flight is?
It totally differs. I do have a bit of claustrophobia. I would say 90% of the time I'm picking aisle because I like to be able to have the freedom to go to the bathroom when I want. And I don't sleep well, so I don't care if people wake me up to get over me or around me or whatever. So I'd say the majority of the time I like to be on the aisle because I feel like the window seats are awesome if you can film stuff and everything. But on long flights, I'm normally not even paying attention. So it's like rather that filming. But if I'm really needing to sleep, I will sometimes choose the window because I think the window is the best if you don't need to pee, if you're good, if you're not a big bathroom user on airplanes. Windows are great because you're not getting bumped by people. You don't really have to mess with people. You set yourself up and you can lean, like you get a little more leaning space of the window to sleep.
Yeah.
So
your head's
as
not
I'm
like
demonstrating,
bobbing around.
your head's not bobbing around. People aren't, like I said, bumping past you, getting around, all of that. It's just, you're in an insulated area. So if you can, sometimes when I'm like, oh, I'm going to be good, it's late at night. So I'm just going to go to the bathroom once and then put my mask on and my headphones and try and sleep. Sometimes I'll pick it up, but I would say rarely.
Yeah.
My new favorite on international flights is the aisle of the middle section.
How come?
Because often people will not pick the seat next to you in those fours. You can see, especially if you change, it's like where I'll normally, if I pay for my seat or pick my seat in advance, I might pick one of the twos, hoping that it's not a full flight. But everybody wants the two seats because you always want to sit next to one person as opposed to three people. And so many people, unless you're a family of four, don't take that center section. I'm also careful about if I see all four are taken, I'm like, oh, probably as little kids, two parents, maybe
don't be right in front of them where you're
exactly. Make sure I'm 2 rows behind them.
And yes, we know that we used to talk a lot about family travel, but it's okay.
They're allowed on the plane. I have no issue. I'm just going to just going to use my knowledge to go. I'm not going to sit in front of a row of all four booked
because a lot of times
they're going to be grabbing your chair.
Yeah, but if a family of four
playing games on the
to
thing.
fit in, and there's not like one section of four, they'll do the two and then the other two. So if you're I'm like, ooh, now we're on video and I can use my hands.
I know, that's what I'm doing all the time.
And the other two, and then you have one seat and then you, because,
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I would say that I am very much like you, and that I'm actually sitting here thinking, wow, if I take a sip of water now, everybody gets to see it because we're on video.
Go for it.
Out of water, and so I usually have to get up any kind of longer flight. The only time I really book the window now is if it's like a 6 a.m. flight. Like a lot of times I have a 6 a.m. flight that connects through Atlanta. So it's a fairly short flight. It's 2.5 hours. So I can get by. Like, after woken up, I go to the bathroom at the airport, and then I'm trying to like sleep a little bit on the plane. So that's like the only time I really book the window. Otherwise, I'm always going for the aisle. So I want to ask you this though. If you and Paul, or you and Mia, or you and Lizzie, what do you do then? Because Hannah always likes the window. I try to do like where it's a window and I get an aisle.
Right.
But so many flights are full that you can't always leave one in between, or it's not if it's a 3-3.
Yeah, the 3-3. Yeah.
And Glenn likes the aisle and I like the aisle. And I've noticed recently that I book the flights and sometimes I assign myself the aisle and he still sits in the aisle. And I'm like,
I would have an issue. I'd be like, no, you're moving. It's funny.
But yeah, so sometimes I will just do aisle middle because I know there's probably going to end up somebody in between. And then I don't have to climb over that person to get out. Glenn falls asleep within 3 seconds. Lucky him. Yeah. What do you do with your family?
I'm like such a mean mom. If it's a 3 setup, I will give them the option. I'm going to sit in the aisle. If you want the window, there's going to be someone in between us. And that's just life, right?
Yeah.
Like, I travel around strangers all the time. It's not a big deal to me to travel. My kids are old enough. I'm not going to be reaching over that stranger to help them with their iPad or their snack. So it's not a problem. So that's what I do. And a lot of times now when it's 3-3s and I'm traveling with Mia, she would rather sit next to me on an aisle than in a window with a stranger between us, because she likes aisles too.
So you would both be in aisles, but across the aisle from each other.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm trying to tell Glenn that's what we should do.
Yep. That's what we do the majority of the time now, because we're an aisle loving family. Paul's the same way. So we'll do all aisles with strangers just so we can all be on our own and have it, but we'll try and be across from each other where we can look and point to stuff, and then we're not bothering a person when we're talking about it.
It's funny because you want to sit with the person you're with, but then, like I said, Glenn falls asleep right away, or he's got his headphones on, he's listening to something. Like, we're in our own separate world, like the whole time we're on the plane. It's just, I just don't feel guilty making a move so I can get out and go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
That's basically the only difference, between that.
But I will say
and I'm not going to be like, don't touch me. No.
Yeah.
But I am going to be like, get your leg out of my way if I only have so much space too.
I'll never forget. I had a really awkward time when I'm embarrassed to tell this story, you guys. I was trying to go to the bathroom and I was on a window and the guy next to me was an aisle and it was just 2 of us, right? And I decided I was just going to step over. I have long legs and I was like, I'm just going to step over him instead of waking him up, because I was still a new international travel. I wasn't quite sure what the etiquette should be, but he woke up with me like straddling him and was very upset. And he was like, just wake me up. And I was like, sorry. What is the etiquette there? I don't know. You guys should chime in. Send us a message or send me a message. Was I completely in the wrong? What should you do if the person next to you is sleeping and you need to get out? And you have long legs, so I cleared it. Like, he wouldn't have known. He obviously just sensed there was a body in close proximity.
Which is probably what I do. People can be really difficult. On our flight back from Turkey, I was okay, but I talked to someone else that was on my flight, and she said the person next to her refused to get up to let her go to the bathroom.
So she had to climb over her.
Like, what
and
are you supposed to do? Like,
you
what do
don't,
you mean?
yeah,
Like,
there's
you
no
can't
reason.
refuse. You can't.
I saw somebody complain in one of the Facebook groups that I'm in, and they were just, it was just on a flight, and it was like a 4 or 5 hour flight. And she's like, I kid you not, this person had to go to the bathroom 3 times. 3 times I had to stand up for this person. And they were like livid. And everybody in the comments was like, dude, that's what you get when you're an aisle. Like, the window gets to control the window. You get, more space.
Yeah.
You get freedom. But we all have responsibilities that come with our seat, right? The responsibility of the aisle person is to stand up however often it's needed to let people out. So I just thought it was crazy that they were so offended. Yeah, exactly. And who cares? Like, I could care less you do not know their problem. And they might not have even chosen that seat. They probably got assigned that seat. So how dare you think you have the right to tell them they should have sat in an aisle? Yeah. Anyways, sorry.
No, I agree. Well, here's another little pet peeve when it comes to windows. Who do you think it's okay if someone reaches behind and shuts your window shade? Like, if they're the window in front of you, if they like reach back and like shut it, or they reach forward and try to shut it.
Yeah, I think no, you get the one that's at your row. Yeah. And unfortunately, sometimes with some airlines, when you recline back, there is another window that might be next to your seat now, but you do not have rights to that window.
When you're in the exit row too, it's a little, sometimes you don't have a window, or sometimes you have 1.5 windows.
The 1.5, that's the one that's the issue, right? That always causes the trouble. And it's at that point, you just have to, and my theory has always been that if you're both fighting, like one wants it open, one, then it goes halfway.
Yeah.
That's the compromise. Halfway. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's such a thing as communication, but the world has forgotten that. I don't know. I think when you fly, you have to be open-minded that you're in public with people who are different than you.
Yeah. So what are some of your other tips? I know we talked about like on the plane. To me, one thing that I always think about is if I have a tight connection, then I really want to be as far forward on the plane as possible. And it's worth probably me paying for some type of preferred seat or getting as far up as I can in the included seats. Because even 10 minutes, if you're just circling for 10 minutes and you only have a 45-minute layover and you have to switch terminals, I don't know. It's just not worth the stress, because getting off the plane can take forever, and things just drive me bananas when you see the people like pushing forward. I have a connection, and we're like, we all have connections.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's something to keep in mind. I also always think if you're flying in international, especially at an airport that has challenging customs, like long custom waits, paying for a closer seat in those kind of airports sometimes can help. But the truth of the matter is, even if you're at the front of your plane, there probably was a plane that landed 5 minutes before you, and they're all at the customs check too. Yeah. So you can't always count on that giving you a leg up, but sometimes you can. It just depends. The biggest tip that I wanted to mention that I use frequently now happened for years, is and there's been grumbles about it lately, but it's a site called Seat Guru. And some people have said it's not updated anymore. So certain airlines, especially if they've gone through a refurbishment, or if their seating things have changed on certain planes, that might not be upgraded. There's a new site called Aerolopa, Aerolopa. I don't like that one as much because I have trouble seeing the notes, like especially mobile. I can't get it to ever see what I'm supposed to be reading for each of the sites. But for Seat Guru, it'll show you like, oh, that's a red seat. Like, avoid that one. Because notoriously for Alaska, I hear families who choose I think it's 11 or 12, thinking their kid's going to have a window seat. And on those, 737s, there's no window there. And so it's a notorious thing. I like those sites just to get an idea where it's, they're wall armrests, or beware, there's no window there, or close proximity to the galley and the bathrooms. And it just gives a visual layout that shows you the plane design. So that's my biggest tip for people, is to really look at that. Also, if you're comparing for families, like we were just talking about, Tamara, if it was me and Mia going to Ireland, I know that Aer Lingus does the 242 configuration on most of their planes. So I'd feel better doing that. Whereas TAP or someone else might do a 333. And so then you're always going to be in that 3 setup. So if you're a family of 2 or a party of 2, you almost want to choose the 2 seating airline over the other ones, perhaps, unless you're hoping for that middle seat being empty. But it's just something to keep in mind when you're comparing airlines. The seat maps matter.
The longer the flight, the more you're paying for a flight. I can't even say you want a good experience, because Like, I don't
It's
know. That's few and far between, probably, even if you're in business class. But you want to not be miserable. You want to avoid the pitfalls if you can. At the same time, if you are looking for not paying any extra, then just realize that if you're willing to either not pay for a seat assignment at all and just get it assigned when you check in, which you can always kind of gauge that a little bit by seeing how full the flight looks, if you
yeah,
think it's going to be bad or not, and how much you want to sit with someone versus you don't really care. And just know that usually the back of the plane is where, if they do reserve some rows for families, it's at the back of the plane. The
by
back
the
of the plane
bathrooms.
is by the bathrooms is where you're not going to have to pay any extra, or the middle seats are where you're not going to have to pay any extra for your seat. And that's why sometimes I feel like status for airlines is so hard to achieve and maintain. It gets harder every year.
Hmm.
And so sometimes I'm just willing to spend that little bit of extra, even if I don't have status, but just to try to buy my way into early boarding. Like American Airlines, you pay, I don't know, $25, and it's, you get the preferred seat, you get the early boarding, and you're like, okay, like that just minimizes my stress a little bit more. And there
Yeah,
are
and I think it
some,
also depends on the carry-on check situation, like how you
yeah,
travel as well. Because
right.
sometimes if you've got a checked bag, if it's not international, you don't have to clear customs. Being further back in the plane is not as big of a deal because you got to wait 20 to 30 minutes for your suitcase to get to the thing anyways. But yeah, if you're that, I see what you mean. Like paying a little extra for peace of mind is huge.
Yeah. And the one thing that I've done is, this may apply more to frequent travelers, but if you do have the American Express Platinum card, either the business or the regular, you get a $200 airline credit per year, but you have to select your airline in January. I'm like, when is this coming out? Do that now.
Yeah,
Um,
you got to do it now if you're changing. If you
but that
stayed the same, I
applies.
think it stays. I don't.
Yeah, that just rolls over. But it applies to things. It doesn't apply to the fare, but it applies to things like upgrades, like seats or check bags or something like
Yeah,
that. So I've
food on board.
strategically used that to be like, okay, I have $200 to play with this year to get myself some better seats.
Yeah,
So
but granted, it is the same airline all year
yes,
long. So you have to know, oh, I'm going to, but if you, and it's only certain airlines, not any airline, they have a list of, like, I don't know, 12. But if you fly Delta a lot, or if you fly, I have Alaska chosen and use it for,
well, it's
I
like
use it a lot for online, like food on board.
I
But
had
yeah,
Delta Platinum status last year, so then I could automatically upgrade myself to Comfort Plus, and they were just, or I could pick a preferred seat for free. So I didn't bother with that, but like I do, we fly JetBlue when we go down to Florida to see family. So I
yeah,
knew like, okay, JetBlue. A lot of times for business trips, I have to fly American, and that's one where I always, they just, it's not a budget airline, but there's still a lot of nickel and diming with them.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I've used those too in the past.
Nice. Any other final tips on your end with seat selection on an airplane that you consider?
Not that I can think of. What about you?
The final thing I would just like to make sure to mention, I think I've always said this, but the plane type matters and it's not always the same. They change aircraft. So another thing to be aware of is even if you pay in advance and buy an exit row, and then all of a sudden they decide to downgrade that plane because maybe they didn't sell enough tickets, or they upgrade it to a bigger plane because they sold more tickets or something, there's a chance your seat might change. And often they won't always tell you that or notify you of that. So you'll show up to the airport and you're like, wait a minute, I paid for an exit row and now and they're like, there was an aircraft change. So we're not held accountable for that. So just always be mindful of that sort of thing. Check in on your flight a week before, 72 hours
Yeah,
before. Just make sure everything's cool, and just be mindful that aircraft swaps do
that's
happen. So know your type
a very
of
good
plane.
tip, and it happens all the time. I feel like recently there's so many schedule changes, aircraft changes.
Yeah.
I mentioned at the top of this episode that I was just on the phone with Avianca last night. We were flying home on a certain day, certain times. They've completely changed their schedule, and my choices now are either to come home the day before, so to cut my vacation short, or 3 days later, because they're just not doing flights for 2 days.
2 days.
And
Yeah.
so that can really switch things up.
Yeah.
And in doing that also, I rebooked, but I didn't want to do it online because I wanted to like really understand my options. So I had to wait around and do a long call with them.
Yeah.
But in doing that, there was also a plane change. So my flight back, because the whole reason we were doing the flight we were doing is that I got a really good business class.
Yeah.
And the way down, I think, was just like the 330, 320, like the A.
Yeah.
So it wasn't
330 probably.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was more the old style business
Yeah.
class. But the way back, at least from Santiago to Bogota, was going to be the pods and the really nice experience.
350.
Not
nice.
anymore. So like I checked, and whether I did the early flight or the one a couple days later, it's the same.
They moved that plane off that route.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and you just had that where Turkish did that to you, like you were wanting to fly business class, or I think one of our friends had this. They were booked into business class. Then Turkish canceled that flight for that day, and so they could get them on the next day, but not in business class. The only business class, the first business class seats were 3 days out, and so it's got like they have a smaller cabin, and even domestic has this problem. It's not just international airlines. Alaska's notorious. They have cabins with 3 rows of first class and cabins with 4 rows of first class, and so if you're in that 4-row first class cabin and they switch aircraft, and all of a sudden there's only the 3 rows, 4 people are getting kicked out of business class. So
yeah,
I'm gonna keep in mind.
I think the thing is, just don't assume that you set it and forget it, because chances are there might be some changes either to your schedule. And when you get those emails, you need to go in and either accept or reject it, because if they change your schedule by a certain amount, then they have to either give you your money back or whatever. You need to go in and look at what the choices are and accept it, and not just leave it. They even changed Hannah's flight to Peru. Like they change flight schedules and flight equipment all the time. So you do need to stay on top of it. So
so that's kind of my final tip. I think that one thing to close out is just to remember that we are flying in a machine at 30,000 feet, 40,000 feet that's going to get us to where we want to go in 8, 9, 10, 15 hours that we couldn't even see. So if we all go into it understanding the beauty and amazing gift that air travel is, maybe we smile a little bit.
That's such a positive
deal
thought
with
to end on. I'm so proud of you.
I don't know.
It's very hard to walk away from a discussion about air travel and smile. So
well, hopefully we've helped everyone have some new things to think about. I think that's what's always interesting, just things to take into consideration the next time you're booking your air trip. Right. What are we covering next?
Speaking of long flights, on our next episode, we're going to go back to Turkey, and we're going to talk about Cappadocia. So stay tuned if you want to hear about some magical places to visit.
Talk to you soon.
Bye. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe and rate and review on your favorite podcast app, as that helps other people discover us. And if you want to see more, follow me, Tamara, at Your Time to Fly on Instagram and Facebook and all the others.
And you can follow me, Kim, at Stuffed Suitcase on Instagram, Facebook, and of course my blog.